Hi, my name is Ida.
And my name is Deja, and welcome to Sad Girl Sunday.
Welcome to another Sunday with the Sad Girls. Besides having extraterrestrial experiences at my mother's house, um, the flooring has been removed. Now we have hardwood floor all over the living room, and I'm not gonna lie, it looks way nicer. Like I don't know what about the hardwood for us, and it's just like pretty clean to be honest. But the walls, we've been pressing the managers and the property management company to paint our fucking walls because this color is not the way it was looking when we first moved into this building. I told my mom that if they don't paint for her, I'm happy to do it for her and like get
Oh yeah,
somebody
that
to
would
do
be so
it.
fun.
I think it'd be nice. And I think it'd be nice to choose like a nice warm color for the house.
Yeah.
What about you? How you been doing?
I'm good. I don't have any ghost stories to share, so I'm saying my prayers. Oh my goodness, I'm scared for you. But yeah, no,
Do not
I'm
say
doing
that.
well. No, seriously, I'm not scared for you because you are blessed and highly favored and you are covered. Wearing the armor of God. I'm like, but no, yeah, this week I think was just, I don't know, COVID has really put a wrench in like the average work week just because now that you're working remotely, there's no real line of demarcation as to when your workday starts and stops, which means we now have to be more responsible or get better at that work-life balance. And I'm still a year in, I'm still trying to balance work, because if somebody sends me an email at 6, it's like, I know I shouldn't, but I mean, my computer's here and I try.
They
I just
send you
quickly get
emails at
going.
6 p.m.
I work with physicians.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Like, I've gotten emails at like 2 a.m. I've gotten emails all different times of the day.
Mm.
And I know obviously it's not like you're obligated to respond, but I just feel, I'm like, oh my God, this is life and death. Like, when a lot of people are like, this is not life and death. And I'm like, what if it is? Like, I work in like cancer research, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
anyway.
Working in medicine in general.
Yeah, it's it requires a lot of flexibility in it. So, I'm trying to be as flexible as possible. But that being said, I also really love my weekends because of that. So,
And I think it's also like kind of what you were saying when we were talking yesterday about, especially like now that things have become more pushed online, the distance between your personal life and work life is becoming more and more, I guess, like the gap is just closing.
yeah.
It's becoming more enmeshed and tangled with one another. And it's becoming harder for people to kind of create that boundary, which isn't really healthy.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that you're working on that for yourself, girl.
But yeah, so I'm glad that we were able to check in and just kind of go over how our weeks were. Last week, we actually discussed the archetypes that are often placed on Black women, but in today's episode, we're going to be taking one step further and talking all about this idea of the palatable Black girl. It is a concept that we will really delve into a little bit later in the episode, but before we get into all of that, let's see what news and updates we have from the week.
Yep. So first good news slash update of the week. Derek Chauvin, the man who murdered George Floyd, he was on trial this week, and excuse me, he already faced charges of second degree unintentional murder and second degree manslaughter, but the judge reinstated a third degree murder charge against Chauvin, and this third charge now like gives prosecutors an additional pathway they can take towards conviction. And so we hope that this will stick. It's just kind of ridiculous in my opinion. We talked about this earlier also, that like we have to jump through hoops and loops to be able to get justice for a man who literally murdered George Floyd. Like there's a recording of it, an 8 long minute video. We all saw him kneel on this man and suffocate him with his knee, and he still is on trial. He still hasn't been put in jail. It feels like it was so long ago. It happened like last summer, and it's just kind of crazy that it's still up for debate. But I'm happy that they are still making an attempt to find a way to make this man serve justice for his actions. So yeah, good news. Good to be aware of the trial and what's going on, and that's why we're mentioning it in the episode this week.
Yeah. Another thing that is taking place, or that took place this week, is that we are closer to getting that stimmy. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Earlier this week, Biden signed the 1.9 trillion, yes, trillion with 12 zeros, COVID relief bill. And this legislation includes direct payments of up to $1,400, which honestly should be hitting some of y'all's bank accounts as we speak. And dependents now get stimmies too. So that is amazing. It also has extension of unemployment benefits, expansion on the child tax credit, rental assistance for struggling households, assistance for K-12 schools for reopening, and most importantly, funding into the COVID-19 vaccine distribution and testing. And honestly, we wanted to bring this up because this is huge. As you may or may not be aware, communities hit the hardest by COVID have been predominantly Black, Indigenous, people of color, just due to lack of infrastructure and a whole host of other social determinants. So the additional aid is going to be great for members of these communities. Honestly, let's get real, 1,400 is pennies compared to what people really need. And we have now been in this pandemic for over a year, and people are still struggling to find their footing. So while I am happy about 1,400, I think that's great that people are getting some extra money, that they could choose to do whatever they want with it, whether that's helping with rent or investing or just, having that spending money. But it's definitely not even like a dent in the kind of relief that some people need.
It's such a short-term solution.
Yeah.
It's just a Band-Aid, and we really need like full-on surgery for the issues that we're having with our infrastructure. So it's like, for the people, I mean, like we all, like anybody who needs that support and help, it's great that the stimulus is coming out, but we need to tax the wealthy. We need to create access to healthcare. We need to be able to give people better quality education. All of those other things are being overlooked, and the stimulus is like being hyped up. So it's just kind of like, especially during this pandemic, I wish we put more focus on letting people have access to high quality healthcare over just like giving somebody $1,400. But I'm glad that it's going to be available for the people who need it immediately.
Exactly. So that is a little light for some people, a little light at the end of the tunnel. And then also, this is not necessarily good news or bad news. This is just news that we feel like is imperative to share with the community. Apparently, Netflix is cracking down on password sharing. So hide your kids, hide your wife, hide your Netflix password, because they announced earlier this week that they're launching a feature aimed to block users from sharing accounts if you're not part of the account owner's household. Essentially, and according to reports, the streaming giant is actually testing out this new feature that prompts people to verify that they in fact do live with the account holder. And Netflix will have like a little pop-up, I guess, that will say, if you don't live with the owner of this account, you need your own account to keep watching. So I know I am in possession of a Netflix password, and it's like within my family, but it's also not mine. So I guess I should be fine. But for those who have like Netflix passwords of their best friends, uncles, like their distant cousin, yeah, y'all need to find a black backup plan because they come in for
Yeah, that I'm one of those people. I feel like every time I come home to my mom's house, the TV Netflix app on the Roku has a
me.
different account signed into it, like of a person that I've never heard of or know. There's always like
Oh my
somebody who's
god.
like signing into like my mom's TV, and I'm just like, thank y'all,
Oh.
but
And then they forget. No, that would be the worst thing. You're in the middle. Oh, that happened to me. I was in the middle of some series, and then we like no longer had access to HBO. So imagine like you're in the
oh,
middle of a Netflix series, and then Netflix all of a sudden is like, yeah, it sucks. So you no longer have access to this
getting just
account.
cut off.
Oh, that'd be the worst.
Yeah, but yeah, just some news for y'all to stay updated on. Now moving into the topic of our episode, palatable black girl. So, what is a palatable black girl? I wanted to kind of build a image of what a palatable black girl is by pulling an excerpt from this article titled Black Face, White Voice, and Unpacking the Palatable Black Girl Identity. And this article was written in 2019 by the Verve team, which is like a subsection of medium.com. And the writer of the author, I guess, the blogger of this article, her name is Chanju Mwanza. And in the excerpt that I pulled from, she states, I soon became the palatable black girl. While my skin may be black, my accent and upbringing immediately made me more palatable to white people. I grew up in a quasi right wing town where my family was just about seen as the good immigrants. And different from the bad blacks, we lived in the good part of town. I went to a private all girls high school and soon became so comfortable in whiteness that I remember, age 14, saying if I ever had to choose between a group of white people and a group of black people, I would feel more comfortable with the whites. And so this is just to kind of give you the perspective or angle from an individual that has kind of been handed the identity, or I guess you can say this is also kind of like an archetype of being the palatable black
Mm-hmm.
girl.
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, for those who are unaware, the palatable black girl ideology is essentially this rejection of the stereotypes or the negative, let me be extremely specific, the negative stereotypes of the modern day black woman. So you really try to other yourself from trying not to be too loud, not to be too angry, not to be too promiscuous, to this, to this. You really try to stay as cookie cutter as possible. And so you try to distance yourself from these archetypes that we talked about in our last episode. And one thing to note is often it's never a title that you give to yourself, rather a realization of how you appear to others. You know, so showing up in spaces and people saying, oh, wow, you know, so and so speaks so well or does this so well, or you're so pretty for a black girl, or you're so blank for a black girl. So it's oftentimes how people see you, not
Mm.
necessarily a trope that you put on yourself.
Yeah. And we felt that this was relevant to bring up this week because of the Oprah Winfrey interview with Meghan Markle. I mean, at this point, everyone knows or should be aware if you're not aware. That interview that Oprah Winfrey had with Meghan and Harry, Meghan Markle opened up about some of the experiences that she had while she was pregnant with her child. And her husband, Harry, would be kind of pulled aside to have conversations about how their son wouldn't be eligible to be crowned prince as he grew into old age, how there were concerns with his skin color, and kind of challenging the credibility and I guess the value of, you know, I don't know if Markle is half black, a quarter black, but a partially black baby being adopted into the royal family's history. And so, in the midst of all the backlash, we came across a tweet that read, I'm not sure the name of the person that made this tweet, but they said Meghan Markle is the most palatable black girl I know. And we wanted to really dig into the complexities, not only of what it means to be a palatable black girl and what that looks like, but how colorism, body size, texturism, and all the isms play into the idea of what it means to be a palatable black girl.
Yeah, and I think it's also important because just discussing this today, I think it resonates with a good chunk of Black women, and honestly, even Black men. I'm sure there is like a trope of like the palatable Black man, but only speaking from a woman's perspective because that's all I'm able to give. This really did resonate with me, this idea of being a quote unquote palatable Black girl, having grown up in a predominantly white community for a large part of my childhood, then going to a predominantly white high school and undergrad. This concept has always been at the forefront of my experiences and has really dictated how I have moved and navigated in these spaces, you know, from being called Oreo in high school or having people tell me you're not like other Black girls, whatever that means. And unfortunately, at the ripe age of 14, 13, I did not have the wisdom, the confidence, or even the vernacular to articulate how those phrases actually made me feel. So I shrugged them off. And I mean, I think others can relate to the idea of shrugging off harmful or thinly veiled comments so as not to cause a scene or be depicted negatively, which goes right back into that trope of being a palatable Black girl. And unfortunately, I also upheld them, you know, contorting myself in these spaces, policing my own actions. Don't do that. You can't wear this, et cetera, et cetera. So as not to come off as anything other than digestible and non-threatening to the masses. And unfortunately, I am now finding out the long-term side effects of my actions because now, some years later, I'm having to unlearn the problematic concepts that I tried to uphold. And I'm also trying to discover who I am outside of the rules and constraints that society and myself have put on me in order to fit into this narrow ideology of what a Black girl, now woman, should act like, should look like, should be like. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's absolutely necessary to kind of like find yourself and figure out like who you are apart from those, images or those, boxes that people try to push us into. I would say for my experience, being pressured to be palatable in a white dominant society was something that came from multiple angles. It came from my family, my educational environment, even in my career. I think I was pushed to pursue the image of a palatable Black woman. Like I can give a few examples when I think of some of the experiences I've had with family, even at a very young age. My mother, who migrated to the United States from East Africa, she did not speak to us in our native language as children for fear of us not performing well in school in the United States. And the consequence of that, of her trying to pursue being more palatable for a white dominant society, is that we are more distanced in some ways from our native culture just to make other white people more comfortable. Another example from my educational experience. I remember in my senior year of high school, I wore shorts to class for the first time all year. And my English teacher literally scolded me in front of everyone for wearing revealing clothes. But the white and Asian students that had more Eurocentric, slimmer figures would wear the same type of clothes. And they were never scolded or shamed in front of the students like in my school or in my class. And I was, in a way, being body shamed for not having a palatable figure. And I received messaging as a young teenage girl that I have to strive for a certain body image to be able to wear the same exact clothes as white women that like white women were permitted to wear, in their natural state. And then in my career, I've definitely had some work experiences overseas where I was told I could not style my hair in its natural state. And some people were even denied positions teaching overseas at certain schools if they didn't look like native English speakers. And so the consequence of not being palatable in that, area of your life is you lose certain financial opportunities for not being palatable enough, for not being the standard, or kind of, in a way, pursuing the standard of white Eurocentric values. So there's many pressures in, the life of especially women of color, Black women, and Indigenous women who live in white dominant societies. There are
Mm-hmm.
many pressures for us to pursue that palatableness.
And I mean, honestly, the article that we found that I think is so important to highlight is this idea that while we may strive to be palatable in order to be able to survive in certain places or navigate certain spaces, that does not exempt us from discrimination. And so this extremely well-written article by Keaton Smith titled "Living as a Palatable Black Girl Hasn't Saved Me from Discrimination" talks about that, how her immigrant parents, throughout her childhood and her siblings' childhood, really tried to ingrain in them being this version of themselves so as to, you want to act right, as she says in the article, quote unquote. So she was talking about how her parents always made sure their lawn was well manicured. They were extremely friendly to their neighbors. Her parents always told her, to hold yourself in a certain way. And so there were so many experiences and examples from the article of her personal experience that she was able to connect to this quote unquote training that she got from her parents in childhood on how to be palatable, how to be approachable in the communities that you're in where a lot of people don't look like you. But as she goes on to say, that palatableness has not exempt her from some harmful and unfortunate experiences that she has had to endure, because at the end of the day, she is a Black woman.
Right. And gaining access and status is a consequence in some ways of performing that role. I think in the article she mentions she's successfully been able to navigate certain circles and have, the right kind of education allow her to kind of have access to those circles. The way she talks, she says, I talk the right way. I'm never too aggressive or too loud. I don't act ghetto. And my braids walk the fine line of being cool, but not too much. My skin is dark, but not too dark. And I'm pretty for a Black girl. And so, the kind of messages that this writer from the article is being sent throughout her life, she's kind of receiving messages that she is palatable, that she's palatable enough. She fits within the ideal value system that we have to strive towards when it comes to living in a white dominant society. And so she also learns, that being palatable doesn't save you from racism. Surprise. It is a false sense of security. She explains in the article she's had experiences throughout her life, in addition to people commenting her kind of being not too loud or not acting ghetto. She still gets mixed up for other Black people at work.
Mm-hmm.
She still has to police her, justified, emotions if she gets, I don't know, accused for being too confrontational or argumentative. If, somebody is invading her space by touching her hair, she has to check the way she reacts to somebody within that scenario, so that way she doesn't lose her palatableness. And I think this is so relevant to what happened to Meghan Markle. You know, Meghan Markle is a beautiful, fair skinned queen who, you know, doesn't wear her hair out naturally. It's always pinned straight. She has a, ideal body type. She is well educated. She's financially successful. She has been married into the wealthiest, most popular royal family in the world. She has passed so many levels of palatableness in her life, but she was still facing discrimination and racism. Even at the level of access that this woman had, she still had to deal with discrimination. Like, you cannot escape it, regardless of how much you try to contort yourself, how much you try to fit into this box. And so, yeah, it's just so relevant to, I think, many people's experiences. I think it sends a good message for, it's a reminder for many of us who are in academic and white dominant career spaces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and the article, honestly, overall in the article, she discusses not only how it's not able to save her from, having these discriminatory experiences or having microaggressions hurled at her and things of that nature, but she talks about it how it's almost this double-edged sword, because while you are, like I was saying, able to navigate these spaces, you're still being faced with these harmful situations and scenarios. But she ends up concluding the article just saying that we need to really, in order to get past this idea of this palatable Black girl and help correct the narrative of what society deems as quote unquote palatable, we have to disengage in behaviors that consciously force us to assimilate in order to fit the quote unquote status quo. And that's not only on the part of Black women and Black girls really trying to no longer police ourselves. And it's so much easier said than done, because while it's easy to say, we have to disengage from these behaviors, we have to try to not assimilate, it's also about safety, and self-preservation. A lot of individuals' palatability and a lot of individual being able to, or getting that access to higher education, getting that financial access, all of that is to procure self-preservation and to allow you to navigate safely in spaces where you may be one of many, So she says that, and then also she goes on to conclude that we have to, not necessarily we as Black women and Black girls, but more so others have got to refrain from showering us with backhanded compliments about how, quote unquote, well-spoken we are, pretty we are, or, oh, you don't sound like a Black girl, because it implies negative connotations that have to go with the undereducation in the Black community and all of these other things that have bigger, that are part of a bigger system, So if you're speaking a certain way and you go to compliment them, oh, you don't sound Black, that has a history in the lack of education and funding of Black communities and school districts that have predominantly Black students. Like, you're mean to try and compliment people, which also I'm not sure why you would think that that's a compliment, is so much more harmful because it talks about these things that you probably know nothing about. So it's really,
Absolutely. And I would say, just like from my personal point of view regarding the Meghan Markle situation and the article, I mean, regarding specifically the Meghan Markle situation, I'm not surprised. Oprah Winfrey kind of like dropping her jaw in the interview and asking like, what? What did they say to you? It's just kind of like, why are you surprised, Miss Winfrey? The British royal family who has colonized the world, the sun never sets under the British Empire, that whole shindig, they are literally the Olympic lead for racism. And so it's just kind of I don't know, really, it's just a reminder. I'm not surprised. It's more like, oh, remember, it doesn't matter where you are in your life, you're still Black. You're still going to
Mm-hmm.
be viewed a certain way in specific spaces in white dominant societies, even if in non-Black societies. Honestly, most it's sad to say most places are anti-Black. So
Yeah.
if there was a Meghan Markle version that happened in East Asia or happened in the Middle East or South America, there's anti-Blackness wherever you go. So it doesn't matter how palatable you try to kind of be within other societies that are not Black dominant, you're going to be reminded of your place. And that's what happened to this person. And that's kind of the story of a lot of the women who wrote the articles that we mentioned in the podcast today. And so, for me, in my experience, in the way that I relate to that, I know that we mentioned in the other podcast as well the importance of having people kind of break into certain spaces to make the path for those that come after us easier. And I think for me, making this podcast, bring awareness to our listeners, making my life about working towards positive change is so that the people who come after us don't have to experience the same discriminatory acts. And so that's the goal overall, is to kind of call out this racism and call out this performative, I don't know, this pressure to perform and not give in to it.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying to Deja the other day also, I am so sure, like I fall into that category of palatableness. And if you kind of have to, I would say there is a spectrum of palatableness. And I think like
Yeah.
on that spectrum, I kind of fall above the halfway point.
Mm-hmm.
In my lifetime, I have gained access to certain spaces. I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles that is predominantly white. I went to predominantly white universities and colleges. I worked in predominantly white spaces. I've been palatable enough to have access to these spaces. And I think for me, like having access in these spaces, it's my responsibility to kind of spread the message that shit don't get better all the way just because you out here in these spaces. And I want people to
Mm-hmm.
be aware of that. And so all that effort and all that pressure that's put on us to perform, it's not healthy for us. It's not healthy for women to have to pursue those kind of roles just to feel safe, even though it is a form of survivorship. It's a form of, like they just said, self-preservation. But we have to cut the bullshit and we have to call it out so that we are allowed to exist in our skin and as our true selves, and we are respected for the value we bring regardless of how palatable, quote unquote palatable, we are within white
Yeah.
dominant society. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on all of this.
No, I mean, I agree completely. Well, it does definitely have to do with self-preservation, and I know it helps people gain access to certain opportunities, experiences, and spaces. We really do, like Ida said, we have to kind of go against the grain and disengage with those behaviors because we can see that it doesn't save us. It doesn't make us more or less susceptible to racist behaviors and actions towards us. So, I mean, honestly, when I read the article, my first thought was, I feel seen. I was telling Ida, like, every sentence I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Yep, I know exactly what she said. And so, I mean, there's this one part where she talks about, and I quote, she states, our parents have been unconsciously coaching us into palatability before society could even label us as such for fear that we would all automatically be lumped into negative Black stereotypes. And so this is the author just talking about her and her siblings being unintentionally or unconsciously or consciously coached into certain ways to act and hold themselves in society. And I was like, that is so true. Growing up in a two immigrant parent household in a predominantly white neighborhood and being one of, I think, only 3 Black families in town, it was obvious how my parents wanted us to be seen and how they would remind my sisters and I that when we leave the house, we represent them, so there was no wearing spaghetti straps, no wearing skirts that were too short. Like, this was the era of juicy couture, like those like sweatsuits. No way, So from a young age, honestly, like, my sisters and I were booked and busy, from Girl Scouts, soccer, basketball, dance, track, volunteering at neighborhood cleanups, church choir. Like, my parents wanted us to be seen as anything other than the harmful, negative stereotypes that Black women often get associated with, because of being one of the very few Black families in this predominantly white community. And there's a point in the article also where she talks about, that idea of, this isn't a title I gave myself, rather a realization of how I appear to others. And that resonated with me as well, because it was never something, like, I never called myself a palatable Black girl, but rather a way that I came to understand how the world saw me. When people would tell me in middle school or in even like high school and undergrad, you don't sound Black, or, oh, you don't sound like that other Black girl I know. And being like, I don't know what. First off, I don't know how to respond to that either which way. That's not a compliment. It's extremely hurtful and harmful. And I'm not, like, I know you want praise for saying that, thinking that you're being nice and sweet or whatever, but it's not.
It's like, literally, the fuck? Like, I'm pretty for a Black girl, but like, why did you have to add that? Like, what are you?
Yeah. Why can't I just be prettier? Why can't I just be, you know what I mean? And so I remember,
like, what standard do you have in your head?
Exactly. It's just very strange, because I know the standard you have in your head. You have very Eurocentric beauty features and stuff in your head. And so you're saying, you don't have those, but you are still pretty somehow. Or like, you don't speak like how the Black people that I see in TV and in entertainment are portrayed. You know what I mean? Like, I know what I'm being compared against, but it's also not how Black people, it goes back to that idea of how we were talking about, we're not a monolith. I think when people think of Black people, they think of the way that it's portrayed in entertainment, and we could talk about that another day, because that is also harmful and so overly exaggerating of these really negative archetypes that we've talked about. And so they're like, wow, you don't fit into that. Like, you're like a unicorn. Like, I don't know where to place you. And honestly, I agree with her. It really is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it shields you and allows you to navigate through society that often dehumanizes and vilifies Black women. But on the other hand, it does not save me from microaggressions, from being told, you don't sound like that other Black girl, from having people yell the N-word to me on my college campus. Like, it doesn't save you from those experiences. And so at the end of the day, it's like, I know it's for self-preservation. I know it's for my own ability to gain access to opportunities, but at what cost? So I completely agree. I think the only way to get past this, and the only way to kind of not necessarily get past it, but more so push back on this ideology, on this trope, on this, whatever you want to call it, characterization of how you clump Black women who you don't quite know what to do with, is to get rid of this idea of what palatable even means. Like, going against the grain and completely disengaging with these ideas of what we need to do in order to fit into the status quo, or how we need to hold ourselves in order to fit into the status quo. Because the status quo is going to keep moving. Black women, I feel like, will constantly be left out of that kind of area, and it's unfortunate, but there's no need to strive for it, because we will, unfortunately, as a lot of us have seen, or as we even know in media, you could be a Harvard professor and the police are still going to stop you, because at the end of the day, they are seeing your skin color.
Yeah, and that has actually happened. There was like a Ivy League Black professor who was literally arrested for climbing into his own home through a window for forgetting his house keys. So this man and Meghan Markle and all the other successful Black passing people in society will still deal with racism. But Yeah. And I mean, just to jump in on the status quo, and how, we we will never be enough
Mhm.
regarding the society status quo. But the positive optimism I carry is that we create our own
I
standard.
think it's like we already are. I think that is like this idea of like, we have to keep striving for the status quo. We have to keep striving to fit in. We have to keep striving to be enough. And I think the magic and the beauty is that we already are. Black people
Are
have
enough.
endured not
More than
only
enough.
just exactly like not only have we endured more than enough, but we continue to shine, we continue to rise, we continue to outdo ourselves in every aspect of society, whether it's the creativity, entertainment industry, athletic. Like we are continually outshining every day. We are more than enough. And I think it's time that we realize that there's no need to fit into the status quo. There's no need to quote unquote even fit in, because we are already enough. And it's now time for us to claim that, know that, believe that, and then move accordingly.
Absolutely. That's pretty much the show, y'all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in and dissecting the concept with us of the palatable Black girl. And it's important to have these conversations and share the realities of Black, Indigenous people of color, Black women of color, people of the African diaspora, because we need to stay informed and we need to do research on ourselves in order to exist and grow. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in. And yeah, is there anything else you want to add, Deja?
No, I mean, honestly, just if you have any topics you want to tackle, you want us to tackle, or if you want to be on an episode, please DM us. We want to allow people to share their stories and their truths. So as y'all already know, you can listen to this episode and our others on the Spotify app. Anchor will soon be on Apple Podcasts, so that's super
Apple is
exciting.
fucking up though. I'm calling out Apple Podcasts. We've been trying to get on them. We're gonna figure it out. To be continued with Apple Podcasts. That's
So
my
hopefully
2
soon.
cents. Right.
But yeah, as you know, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at SadGirlSunday_. Have a great night, y'all, and thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us for the past hour or so.